So with all of this bickering in Washington, Americans by an overwhelming majority are looking on with disgust. Depending on the poll, about 8 in 10 Americans don't approve of the way Congress is handling its job. So why don't lawmakers do better? Joining us now is Allan Lichtman, Distinguished Professor of History at American University. Allan, thanks for joining us. So the big question, Americans dislike the way Washington is doing its job. Is there any historical context to this? Has there been any other time in history where there has been so much gridlock?
Absolutely, yes. And I'll take you back to right after the Civil War, when the great American president Abraham Lincoln was assassinated right just before the end of the war. And Andrew Johnson, a former Democrat, became president. And throughout his tenure, he just butted heads with the Republicans in Congress who wanted to punish the South and establish rights for the freed African Americans, and Johnson was against all that. And that, of course, led to the first impeachment in American history in 1868. Woodrow Wilson, butted heads with the Congress when he came back from Paris with the Versailles Treaty ending World War I, and he wanted to get Americans into the League of Nations, and the Republican Senate would have nothing to do with that. But there is a big difference. Today, the bickering has become systemic. It's built in. Whenever you have a president of one party now and a Congress, even one House of another party, you're going to have the bickering because in the last 30 or 40 years, the Republican Party has moved to the right and the Democratic Party has moved to the left. So there's no meeting ground between the two of them. The most conservative Democrat is still more liberal than the most liberal Republican.
Well, where do they go from here? What's the resolution? Because the environment is so toxic, and it doesn't matter who Americans support, whether they're for one party or the other. Everyone's just frustrated.
Well, I have to say this, and I hate to do this, but I've got to put part of the blame on the American voter. The American voter hates the Congress. The Congress has lower approval ratings than Attila the Hun, under 20%. But the American people keep sending the same kind of people to the Congress. These professional, place-holding politicians who can't think creatively, who can't get out of their self-interested little box. Until the American people send different kind of folks to Washington, unfortunately, we're going to continue with this problem. And that's really ultimately the only answer. And the other answer, of course, is some horrible crisis. An equivalency of a Great Depression, or another war, or a terrible environmental meltdown. Then things will change.
Well, let's turn to the president for a moment. He is obviously trying to navigate all of this. He's got another 4 years. He continues to press Congress to change the way it does business. But what is this the typical relationship between a president and his Congress?
Absolutely. Look, the president is our only nationally elected official. The members of Congress represent either in the House individual districts or in the Senate individual states. And particularly in the House, which is now Republican, most of those Republicans, because of the way lines are drawn for House districts, are in safe Republican districts. So their danger is not that a Democrat will beat them, but that some Republican will come in and beat them, the way a Tea Party Republican, for example, beat long-standing Senator Richard Lugar in the primary in Indiana. So the president doesn't have much leverage over those Republicans. And let's face it, he's not running again either.
Well, Allan, we have about a minute left. So wrap this all up for us. Will Congress be able to get any kind of bill passed, notwithstanding the fiscal cliff and this aid package for Superstorm Sandy, but will they ever get anything accomplished? Can they pass anything?
Well, when Harry Truman wanted to move the Congress to a new foreign policy, an activist foreign policy, his answer was scare them to death. Only if they are scared to death will they really act in a fundamental way. Forget the fiscal cliff. That's really a minor issue. What about the huger issues like climate change, the environment, like really dealing with entitlements, like dealing with the fact that we're becoming a much more unequal country in terms of income and wealth? These huge issues, aren't even being discussed, much less dealt with. Immigration reform. Instead we're debating whether taxes on millionaires should be 35% or 39%. Who cares in the end?
All right, Allan Lichtman, we'll have to see what happens. We have a new Congress coming in. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.